party neutral facilitator. Anna Shepard is supporting us today with technology and documentation. And please note, you probably heard, we are being recorded, and this is because we'd like to share the presentation with other members of the public that are unable to be here tonight. So just want you to be aware that you're being recorded. This is an informational webinar provided by the Washington Department of Fish and Wildlife on Ebey Island land use and planning. And so if you could advance to the next slide, please. So really the intention is to provide you with updates and information to give you an opportunity to ask questions. So there will be a question answer period here at the end of the presentation and to engage in the process moving forward. And I'll just note in the chat, if you would like to make comments after this meeting, please do utilize the chat link, and GFW is accepting and would like to hear your comments. So if you could move to the next slide, please. This webinar, informational webinar, will be from 6 p.m. to 7:15 p.m. So 1 hour and 15 minutes. Here we are in welcome and introductions. And after I'm done with the introduction, I'm going to hand it off to Lauren, and Lauren will introduce his staff. And then there will be a presentation for 25 minutes, an Ebey Island site overview and planning process presentation. And then after that, we want to allow plenty of time for your questions. And there are staff here to provide answers. And if we cannot answer your question, we're going to work to answer your question. And then we'll move into next steps for 10 minutes. Next slide, please. So I want you to make sure that you can use the Zoom functions. And you'll note that the chat box, if you move your cursor to the bottom, you'll see a chat box, and you'll see a Q&A box there as well. We really want you to use the chat box tonight if you do have that Q&A option, just to keep all the questions in one area. And now after the presentation, if you would like to ask a question verbally, noting it will be recorded, you're welcome to do so during the presentation. If you would like to add questions into the chat, then following the presentation, we'll respond to your questions and we'll make sure they get answered. Also, if you're calling in tonight, you can dial *9 to raise your hand. So if you're on your cell phone or on your house phone, you can dial *9 to raise your hand and *6 to mute or unmute yourself. So again, *9 to raise your hand and *6 to mute and unmute yourself. Okay, next slide, please. Expectations for this webinar are, well, like I said, to add the questions into the chat or raise your hand, your virtual hand, after the presentation. Again, you can add questions into the chat at any point. That'll help staff, work together to get you the best answer that they can, and just engage in a respectful and civil line of questioning. And there'll be an opportunity to submit comments through the Fish and Wildlife link. And so we are not taking comments, we're taking questions tonight, but there is interest in your comments, and that's why the link is provided. So next slide. So would like to hand it off to Lauren Brokaw with Fish and Wildlife to introduce his staff and other colleagues. So go ahead, Lauren.
Yeah, thank you, Joy. Hi, everyone. My name's Lauren Brokaw. I'm the Assistant Wildlife Program Manager here in North Puget Sound for Washington Department of Fish and Wildlife. And I'll introduce the other folks on our Ebey Island project planning team. So we have Lindsay Desmal. She's here tonight. She's a habitat biologist in our habitat program. We also have Brian Boehm. He's in our wildlife program. He's the Snoqualmie Wildlife Area Manager. So he's really the boots on the ground on Ebey Island. As part of our team, we also have CK Item. He works for Ducks Unlimited, and he's their Western Washington regional biologist. In addition, we have some of our enforcement staff here with us tonight. We have our local sergeant, Wendy Willett, and we also have officers Nick Yorg and Stephanie Tank. So I just want to start by welcoming everyone. Thank you so much for taking time out of your evening and joining us. Ebey Island is important to us, and the fact that you're making time out of the evening must mean it's important to you too. And so Department of Fish and Wildlife, our region in North Puget Sound here, we manage about 20,000 acres for fish, wildlife, their habitats, and also recreation where compatible. The Ebey Island property that we're talking about tonight is part of our Snoqualmie Wildlife Area. The Ebey Island unit itself is almost 1,300 acres, so it's by far our biggest unit in the Snoqualmie Wildlife Area. And we're just at the very beginning stages of creating a vision of what that unit could look like for the next 10 years. Our Snoqualmie Wildlife Area and all of our wildlife areas, we have wildlife area management plans for those. Our Snoqualmie Wildlife Area Management Plan, the latest one, was drafted in 2018. And in that plan, it documented a need to come up with a specific action plan for Ebey Island by 2022. And so that's why we're here tonight. And in this plan for Ebey Island, our vision is that it'll be a kind of concepts of a variety of different smaller projects we can implement on the unit over the next 10 years or so. And to shape that plan, input from stakeholders is very important, so we understand what people would like to see out there. And that's why we're here tonight. And in addition to this webinar and gathering comments online and talking with folks, we'll also meet with our Snoqualmie Wildlife Area Advisory Committee, which is a group of about a dozen members that give us input on the entire Snoqualmie Wildlife Area. In addition to that, we'll also be meeting with our tribal co-managers. In this project, we hired Ducks Unlimited as our technical experts. They're helping us understand kind of how the water works on the site and what areas of the site might be better suited for, better or less suited for different projects. We expect to have a draft plan available in April for people to see and comment on, and then we plan to finalize that in June. So again, thank you everyone for joining. I'm going to hand it over to Lindsay Desmond, and she'll provide some more in-depth details about Ebey Island and what we got going on there. So thank you.
All right, thank you, Lauren. Anna, we'll have the next slide, please. All right, so I expect that most of you who are calling in tonight are familiar with Ebey Island, but I'll just give a little background. Ebey Island is located in the Snohomish River Basin. It's located in the estuary, and it's kind of nestled right between the cities of Everett, Marysville, Lake Stevens, and Snohomish. So it's really kind of a pocket in a big urban area. As Lauren said, we own just under 1,300 acres out on Ebey Island. And a lot of that acreage is actually fairly recent acquisitions. We acquired quite a large portion of that, I believe, back in 2007-ish. And we acquired that property with funds that were meant for habitat restoration. So after we acquired that property, we did a feasibility study that some of you may remember came out in 2011. And that was essentially to look at our entire property and see how feasible it would be to restore that back to estuary, and essentially how expensive it would be. And what that feasibility study found was that while it would be really impeccable habitat for salmon if we were to restore it back to estuary, it was, one, really expensive. I believe the report said that construction alone would be approximately $44 million, which back in 2011, you can expect what that would be now. And it was not terribly popular. A lot of landowners on Ebey Island did not like the idea of it being restored. A lot of recreational folks also did not like that idea. And so we decided that it probably wasn't the right time to consider habitat restoration at that time. And since then, our wildlife area manager, Brian Boehm, has done a great job of managing the property, mostly for waterfowl hunting, and it's also a popular pheasant release site. I believe it's becoming more popular now for birding, and we do lease quite a bit of our property to local farmers who help keep down weeds on the property and really help Brian manage a large portion of that 1,300 acres. Next slide. So our vision and purpose for this management plan is essentially to look at what activities are taking place on Ebey Island now. So we know that's hunting, that's also non-consumptive recreation, farming, and habitat, and to enhance those over the next 10 years and also look at other recreational elements that we could potentially add to that property. As Lauren said, we have been working with Ducks Unlimited to expand our focus to water management on site, figure out how we can move water around on our property, potentially enhance wetland habitat. And I do want to point out, a lot of our property was purchased with funds for habitat restoration. And so while that's not what our focus is right now, that is still a long-term goal. Next slide. So we do have some sideboards to consider for what happens on our property. So I'm just going to walk through these. Obviously, all WDFW managed properties follow a WAC, and I'll read this so you guys don't have to. The primary purpose of department lands is the preservation, protection, perpetuation, and management of fish and wildlife and their habitats. Public use on department lands may include fishing, hunting, fish and wildlife appreciation, and other recreational opportunities when compatible with healthy and diverse fish and wildlife populations. Next slide, please. So we do have other sideboards to consider. A lot of these we're going to be considering internally that you guys won't have to really think about, but I'll still lay them out for you. We have a lot of neighbors on Ebey Island. And so everything we do, we need to consider what is going to impact them. You know, we need to consider if we move water around, how's that going to impact our neighbors? And our neighbors also include the diking district that does control the dike around Ebey Island. Another thing we have to consider is, are we going to be able to operate these new activities and maintain any new projects? This next one is really important. We cannot build anything permanent. So everything that we're considering needs to have a lifespan of about 10 to 20 years. You know, we can't build any big buildings. We're not going to be putting in a water slide, anything like that. And then, of course, internally, we need to consider, is it possible to fund? Is it possible to permit? Those kinds of things. Again, like I said, a lot of this will be done internally. Next slide, please. All right, one other thing that's actually pretty cool, and for those of you who are familiar with Ebey Island, you may have noticed this really large forested area on the southeast side of our property. We partnered with Department of Natural Resources and some researchers from Colorado State University, and we found that there is a very rare habitat on Ebey Island. This forested area is a rare fen. And so anything we do out here on Ebey Island, we're going to have to pass by our FEN team, as we call them, to make sure any activities are not going to negatively impact this FEN. They did say that increased tidal inundation, or essentially if we turn it back into an estuary, that's not going to negatively impact it. Any additional water isn't going to negatively impact it, but it's just something to keep in mind. And I'm going to let CK describe exactly what this FEN is because he gets really excited about it. Next slide. All right, so those were kind of our restrictions of the project of what we could consider. But there is a whole heck of a lot of potential out here on this 1,285 acres. It is huge. That's a massive area of land to divvy up and really focus on some exceptional recreation. It is really, really close to Everett. In fact, there is a pedestrian trail that goes from downtown Everett directly to Ebey Island. So that's huge potential right there for foot traffic. And a lot can be improved. We have degraded habitat that can be improved. Our public access, for those of you who have been out there, that can definitely be improved. And we can make agriculture better out there for as long as it is viable on our property. Next slide. So I wanted to mention that on October 20th, we did engage some key partners, landowners, and tribal co-managers, and we essentially gathered them to get feedback in preparation for this plan. So today we're asking that of everyone who's joined us on this call, and we're going to continue to engage partners and others throughout this process, throughout the creation of this plan. So this is not your final opportunity to give us feedback. It will continue as we draft this plan. Next slide. And also, as Lauren pointed out, we are just at the beginning. So this is really exciting that you have a chance to shape, you know, what we see out here for the next 10 years. We're going to use your input and the input we have collected from others externally, as well as, of course, our staff and managers internally at Department of Fish and Wildlife. And then we're going to be using all the technical information that Ducks Unlimited have collected, and that's going to help us shape kind of this overall vision for the next 10 years. And as Lauren said, we should be having a draft out to the public sometime in April, and then we will have a final plan in June, I believe. So with that, I will pass it to CK.
Good evening, everybody. My name is CK Item. I'm the regional biologist for Ducks Unlimited, and I'm going to try to orient everybody to the island. As Lindsay has said.
CK, your sound is just a little light, maybe.
Okay.
There we go.
Is that better?
It is. Thank you.
As Lindsay said, most people on this call probably know Ebey Island a little bit. What I'd like to do with this slide is talk about how, at least I think of the island. There is Everett on the west, and then the hill that leads up to Lake Stevens on the east. That the top part of the unit is basically defined by US 2, so that cuts across the island. There's the western portion of the site, which has some pheasant release. You have the middle lobe, which is kind of surrounded by Deadwater Slough, and then really the only public access is by boat, and that's where a lot of our ag takes place. And then the eastern portion, which has also some ag and some fen habitat. And then outside of the ownership, so if you look at this map, the ownership of DFW is kind of that peach color. Just to the south is a bunch of landowners that primarily manage their property for waterfowl. So they use ag, they use grazing to manage waterfowl habitat. And then beyond that, you have some legacy agriculture. So folks who have been farming the island for a very long time. Next slide. So some of the questions that we were asking for DFW is what conditions could be optimized out on the island for fish and wildlife habitat, for safety, for agriculture, for recreation, for wetland diversity and water quality. And so when Ducks Unlimited went out to the site, that's what we were looking for. And then we were looking at some other basic questions. Does the condition of the drainage network on DFW property negatively impact the neighbors now? And what we found is no. Are wetlands and farmland enhancement projects feasible on DFW land? And we think yes, there are. The Diking District and the current lease farmer has suggestions on things that we can do different. So we're going to provide that to DFW. And then finally, what does the public and other partners have as far as suggestions on management of the land? So that's where we are now. Next, please. So as Lindsay said, this is an urban wildlife area, and all of these elements are both positive and negative. So some of them are more positive than others. But
PK,
yeah.
Sorry to interrupt. I'm getting some messages that it's hard to hear you.
Okay. Let me see if I can fix that. Sorry, everybody.
Technology.
Yep. We tested this before, didn't we?
When you project your voice, it works well.
Okay, so if I talk louder?
Yeah.
Okay, I'll try talking louder. So it's an urban wildlife area. We have US2 water lines. You can see Everett in the background there. We have the pedestrian trail. We have legal dumping. So the pedestrian and bike access we have to Everett could be a really good thing, and it could be a difficult thing. Next slide. And it's also a heavily managed landscape. So all the water that leaves the site has to go through pumps or tide gates, and the island is separated from the river by dikes. And so if the dikes weren't there, the site would flood. So this is a very managed place. Next slide. And this is a map of the drainage. Like I said, everything has to go out the tide gate. So you see there's 3 green dots on the map. Each one of those are tide gates. That lets water out, but doesn't let water in. So when the tide comes up, water doesn't come into the site, theoretically, and water leaves the site when the tide goes out. Those are in not the best shape. The pumps also help keep the site dry. So those are managed by the Dike District. DFW does not control those. Like I said before, it doesn't appear that DFW negatively affects the drainage network. There are some minor drainage conveyance improvements that could be made on the site. It's very important for DFW to maintain good relationships with the Diking District. There's beavers out there and beaver management needs, and the fen is fairly resilient. So there's some enhancement opportunities there. And we recommend that any potential project should consult with the fen team. Just because this is, like Lindsay said, I get pretty excited about this. It's a very, very unique feature. It's a sand volcano, so the water's coming from very far away and bubbling up, and the fen is 15 feet higher than the rest of the island. And basically water flows up through it and then cascades off the top of it. A very unique feature in the world. They don't exactly understand how it was made yet. They've got some good ideas, but that's a whole nother talk that could take at least an hour. Next slide. So the topography of the site, this is in a LiDAR map. So this was made with radar. You can see the blue are lower areas, the red are higher areas, except for that purple color, that's really low. You can see how the fen is a little bit higher. You can see the highest ground on the islands in the southwest corner, and that's actually outside the dike. You can see the dike all the way around, but DFW's property has some distinct low spots that make for really good potential wetland enhancement projects. Agriculture is kind of concentrated on those green areas, which are the high areas around the natural sloughs that formed when this was all tidal. Next slide. There's also this really interesting geologic feature out there called boils, which are they're basically quicksand. Water is piped under the dikes and bubbles up, and it seems to be more connected to the tides. I don't want to say too much about those because I don't exactly understand how these work on Ebey Island, and I don't think anybody else does at this point. We just know they're not very safe, and so that's one thing that we're recommending to DFW, that they need to really identify where these boils are and make sure that folks know to avoid them. But they are on the site, and they're, I believe, a safety hazard. Next slide. So the access on the site, there's 4 basic places to get in right now. The eastern lot is closed, and that's up against kind of Ebey Slough. The western lot is towards the city of Everett, and that's where the pedestrian trail is. The middle lot is going to be expanded and is considered the main lot, and we'll have a non-motorized boat launch to Deadwater Slough, and that's ongoing. And then there's some unofficial spots that are really managed or not managed at all, and they're owned by WashDOT. And so those are folks where people use the pullouts to get into Deadwater. Next slide. And then this is a really important slide. There is a lot of reed canary grass, which is an invasive grass out on the island. And if it's completely unmanaged, it forms these rank mats. So if you look in the middle, there's a picture of reed canary grass with an arrow down to what it looks like when it becomes flooded. And that is not great wetland habitat for pretty much anything. It's very, very difficult for animals to access the marsh. It also chokes out other vegetation, so you get very low plant diversity. It's just not great. So the way you manage these kind of systems is either you let nature go crazy and flood and move water around and landslides and all that kind of stuff, or you disturb the site. And you can do that through agriculture or through grazing or some other periodic disturbance. And you can focus that on farm practices or more natural wetlands, like moist soil management is the term we use. So if you see those 2 pictures on top, one shows ag and one shows moist soil, and then the arrows point to what that looks like in winter. And you can imagine how much nicer that would be for frogs and ducks and geese. So that's one of the major findings, is reed canary grass is bad. Next slide. So this is actually Ebey Island, and it doesn't look like much, but this is the, there's a gas line that runs through the island, and this is mowed once a year, only once a year. And you can see on either side, the grass looks different. It looks a little browner. And in the middle, it's this lighter color. And what that has done is it keeps the grass low enough that you get some of that darker vegetation in the middle to pop up. And it has just, with one single cutting, you get better habitat conditions. So with multiple cuttings, mowing, you can get even better habitat conditions, even if you don't remove the reed canary grass. And so that's just showing a little bit of the potential out there on the island. Next slide, please. And Ebey is a wildlife sink, so it's important locally for all kinds of critters. You'll find deer, bear, coyote, frogs, and ducks, and beaver on the site. Lots of other stuff too. Next slide. And then just in general, the Snohomish is super important to migratory waterfowl on a continental scale. We're one of the important resting stops in Western Washington, which is one of the most important resting stops between the breeding and the wintering grounds for ducks. And so they pass through here twice a year, and the Snohomish accounts for, depending on the species, 40 to 60% of the dabbling ducks that come to Western Washington. And Ebey Island is an important part of that picture. So maintaining waterfowl habitat on Ebey Island is valuable at a continental scale. And with that, I think that's the end of my talk. So I will be handing this back off to Lauren.
Lauren, would you like to walk through opportunities for engagement here? Happy to do it as well.
Yeah, I can take a crack at that. And so we're here tonight, kind of, kicking off the project with the public and providing a portal for comment and giving you all our contact information so we can be kind of in touch on an ongoing basis. But in the winter, early 2023, we're going to also have a meeting with our Snoqualmie Wildlife Area Advisory Committee, where we'll be gathering some specific input from them. And then, as we mentioned before, in the spring, we think in April is when we're targeting to have our draft 10-year plan out, and that'll be on our website, and we'll also be accepting comments on that plan. And then we intend on finalizing that plan in June. Before we do that, however, we'll also meet with our tribal co-managers at the Tulalip tribes to go over the plan. And again, our contact information will be available. So, this is not the only opportunity to learn about the project. I'm happy to talk with folks as well.
Great. All right. Thank you, Lauren, and thank you, DFW staff and Ducks Unlimited staff for having that presentation for folks. And we'd really like, I think that's our last slide there, right? Yeah, good. So this is really a time to ask questions, and would love to see either your hand up, or if you'd like to ask a question in the chat, I'm happy to answer it. I will share one question that we received, which is, what is a sideboard? That's such a good question. And so Lauren added a sideboard. A definition for a sideboard is a constraint that all ideas will need to fit within. So he gave an example: for any idea to be considered, it will need to fit within all of the sideboards. So when Lindsay presented on the WAC or the law, it has to be within that legal sideboard, would be another example. So with that, would love to hear any other questions, and then we also are sharing a link to provide comments. So if you have comments, the link will actually really put those in a format to move into the comment section that they can use when they're developing the plan. But would love to hear questions right now. And I like awkward pauses. Thank you, Victoria. Victoria is asking, what is a fen again? And this might be a CK.
Yeah, a fen is it has to do with it's a rare type of wetland, or it doesn't have to be rare, but it has to do with the composition of the soil. So it's mostly organic soils. And in this case, it's not, it's formed by groundwater as opposed to rainwater. So a bog is similar, but a bog is a rainwater driven system, and a fen is something that has groundwater connections. I'm defining it poorly. I can look it up too.
Yeah, and I'll just kind of expand on that, originally when we started investigating that area, we hired a group of bog experts from Colorado State University and also Washington Department of Natural Resources, what's it called? Heritage Land Program. Lindsay, you're trying to help me. What's it called?
It's the Natural Heritage Program.
Yes. And so they looked at some aerial imagery and suspected that this huge 400-acre feature was a very rare type of bog because it was raised above the rest of the surrounding landscape. And so they went out and did a field investigation, took a bunch of samples. Turns out it wasn't that rare type of bog that they originally suspected. And so the water chemistry in the bog didn't indicate it was rainwater. Like CK mentioned, it was groundwater derived. And also the type of peat that you'd normally see in a bog is derived from sphagnum moss. It's a very particular type of peat. There is a very thick peat layer in the fen, over 9 feet deep in some areas, but it's not derived from that type of moss. It's actually derived from wood and sedges. And in that peat, there are actually sedge sheaths that we found that, you know, some of which are probably well over 1,000 years old. So again, that fen is super interesting. I didn't know the difference between a bog and a fen until we started getting into this work, but sure learned a lot. And yeah, grateful for the experts at Colorado State University and DNR to help us out.
Thank you, Lauren. It sounds pretty unique, and somebody added a definition here. I'm going to go ahead and read it. The definition of a fen is a type of peat accumulating wetland fed by mineral-rich ground or surface water. It is one of the main types of wetlands, along with marshes, swamps, and bogs and fens, both peat-forming ecosystem, also known as meres. Did I say meres correctly?
I think it's Myers.
Myers. I thought I might have been off there. Okay.
Yeah, thank you, Martha.
All right. Another question that we have is on CK's slide, you talked about the Snohomish. What is the Snohomish?
The Snohomish?
Mm-hmm.
The Snohomish Basin. So primarily the watershed. The way birds are counted usually has to do with counties, but in this case, it's primarily the Snohomish watershed. So the Snohomish and the Snoqualmie watersheds.
Great, thank you. And on any of these questions, just let us know if you have any follow-up. Again, feel free to raise your hand or add questions into the chat. Another question, will the Phobes, Ebey, Slough, Dike Trail stay open?
Yeah, I'll jump in and answer that. And Lisa, I see you just posted something else. So that trail is on Snohomish County property across the slough from Ebey Island, if I am thinking of the right one. And that trail is open, and as far as I know, will continue to stay open. I know Snohomish County is planning to do some work out there on their property, but I do not have any idea what will happen to the trail, if it will stay open or not. Now, I do see that, yeah, it can be alarming to run into hunters if you're not expecting it out there. So I think you're probably running into waterfowl hunters, and that runs from October, November, December, January. So any of those months, you probably run into folks out there. But we can always talk to Snohomish County and post one of our signs out there if it would be helpful.
Brian, I saw your hand up. Did you have anything?
Yeah, I was going to just address the hunting part. So it is Snohomish County.
Can we, do you mind, sorry to interrupt you, do you mind if I just read the question? So the question is, if the Dike Trail stays open, are there plans to post the hunting season months? Right now, it's quite a surprise to encounter hunters in the fall after walking there all spring and summer.
Yeah, so how Snohomish County posts their property is kind of up to them. We can certainly be in communication with them and kind of co-post some signage to let people know. But it is a popular waterfowl hunting area, and it is the season, mid-October generally through the end of January is the primary waterfowl season for hunting, and Snohomish County supports waterfowl hunting. So it is active, it is out there, and I'd say wear an orange vest and walk in the middle part of the daytime rather than the early morning or the afternoon, evening hours. But that's something that Snohomish County Parks manages. We can certainly be involved in those conversations. Thank you for the question.
Good question. Okay, the next question. Birding is growing as an activity in Washington. This area has great potential for this. Will this type of wildlife watching be more looked at in the plan? And then there's another note, outside of waterfowl hunting season.
Yeah, I'd say absolutely. Birding is wildlife related recreation, and that's definitely one of the recreation activities that we're considering as part of this plan. Improving access for birders is part of this. One of the small little projects we've moved forward on Ebey Island before going through this comprehensive planning process is, creating a better parking lot in that middle unit, along with access into Deadwater Slough. And so that better parking lot and access into the water there is intended to provide all sorts of benefits to different kinds of recreation, both hunting and birding and, just wildlife outdoor enjoyment as well.
Great, and I'm just responding to all the questions. And if there's any comments, definitely go through the link to make sure that your comments are counted within this planning process. Brian, did you have something else?
Yeah, I'd just like to reiterate what Lauren said. We have very large amount of bird watching going on at Spencer Island to the north of us, of Ebey Island. Crescent Lake Wildlife Area and Cherry Valley are both closer towards Duval, but they're very big sites for bird watching and wildlife viewing. And Ebey Island is the same way. There's a huge amount of variety of birds that fly through that migration corridor. So the birds are there. We've got cropping that's geared towards attracting those to provide the nutrients that they need during their migrations. And the wetland and areas that are suitable for a lot of different types of birds besides waterfowl. So the place is open for that kind of activity, and we hope that the community can embrace that as well.
Thank you, Brian. Another question linked to birding. Are birding trails through the forest being considered?
I can start with this one and maybe you guys can fill in around the edges. I mean, I don't want to say absolutely not and put a sideboard up and say that's not something we'd consider, but that forest, I think what you're meaning is that big forested wetland that's that rare fen. And it's extraordinarily difficult to get to and get around in as it is. That team from Colorado State University, they make their living exploring wetlands like in the Amazon rainforest that are, really hard, dense vegetation to get through. And they said this forest, this fen is every bit as hard as, maybe even harder than getting through that sort of habitat. So I think having a trail in there for birders would be very challenging. And also now that we know it's such a rare feature with important habitat values, we might want to direct, concentrated recreation activities somewhere else on the site might be better suited. So I don't want to say absolutely no, but that I see that as being pretty challenging, I guess.
Yes, and to add to that, the forest itself is actually surrounded by a ditch network. It's probably a 10-foot wide ditch, maybe 12 feet. So it's really challenging to get across through that. And much of the property on the east side of the wildlife area has numerous ditches that run through that, and none of them really have any crossings on them. You literally have to find them and follow them until there's no longer a way around them. So currently that's the way people get around out there, and to get around that type of a barrier is really challenging.
And I'm just going to add, while the fen might be really difficult to put a trail through, I think there are other areas on the wildlife area unit where we could certainly put trails. And I would love to see some, educational trails out there, or signs, and maybe like an interpretive trail. just to draw more people to it. So if you have any ideas about where you would like to see a trail aside from the fen, certainly reach out.
Great. Okay. An invitation. All right. I'm not seeing any other. Oh, now I've seen one. Let's see. Kurt is asking a question. Kurt, go ahead. You may need to take yourself off mute.
Okay.
There you go. We hear you.
First comment is regarding hunting. Pheasant hunting starts in late September. So the people wanting to use it something other than, you know, to go birding or just hiking, you know, be aware that actually starts earlier than mid-October. And the trails to the forest, I've actually been in the forest, and I concur with your researchers. It's a difficult place to get around. I was in there probably 30 years ago. I certainly wouldn't go in there now, but in parts of it, and I didn't get very far. But it's a very interesting place. If they're, you know, potentially, and I don't know what your relationship is with the pipeline, but there is a pipeline that runs through that's pretty wide, and you can walk it. I've walked it during hunting season several times. It's definitely a boot show, but with a little planning, getting access to it, it could be an access to see what that may be like from the edge, which would be of value to the citizens, I think. But it entails developing some relationship with the pipeline, and assuming they have an easement across your property, that should be doable.
Thank you, Kurt. And do encourage you to go through the portal and add comments. You clearly know this area well and use this area. Kurt, do you have any questions?
One question, it seems like the use, and at least on the west portion of that, is very limited during the summer. And I was wondering why that is, you know, and, you know, in addition to just hiking, birding, I've talked to a number of people that'd be interested in dog training and those kinds of activities. And I'm not sure why that's being prohibited at this point. Thank you.
Thank you, Kurt.
I can answer a little bit of that question that Kurt had just asked. The biggest reason is the location of that west parking lot is just ripe for all kinds of illegal dumping, illegal party activity, vandalism, break-ins, and it's really just been a real challenge for the department to manage those types of activities while, you know, trying to attract people into that neighborhood for something like birding. And the amount of the frequency of the activities and the incidences is really a lot to handle. Also coupled with that, over the summer season, there generally isn't a lot of traffic from the daytime users in that area. So it was just decided between Fish and Wildlife. There's a number of entities that also use that area as an access area for their infrastructure, like the City of Everett and the PUD, Drainage District, even DOT. And all of them are really just fed up with the amount of illegal activity that's going on and really threatening the safety of that area. So it was kind of a joint response to our neighbors and our partners that the best solution for, at least for now, is to have it gated off and then have attention brought more to the middle parking area, which is easily accessible, a lot more visible, and a whole lot less of these illegal type of activities that go on in that area. So, and that was the impetus of getting a new front door, so to speak, with a new parking lot being constructed, a boat launch being put in. There's plans for a viewing platform there as well, and a bit of a walking trail. So we're trying to encourage activity where it's actually safer and visible, in hopes of you know, turning that kind of a scenario around. So thank you for your question, though.
Thank you, Brian. So there's a question that I'm going to add some context. So would WDFW consider no bird watching during the waterfowl season? And here's the context. A large amount of bird watchers are unaware of the hunting seasons and how waterfowl hunting works. This creates unsafe situations and hunter harassment. This is from a firsthand experience. So back to the question, would DFW consider no bird watching during waterfowl season?
I mean, typically our areas, if they're open for recreation and hunting, they're open for other recreation as well. That's the way it's, handled on DFW lands. And I'm wondering if Sergeant Willett has any information or legal information that might be relevant to that, any background that you're aware of.
Not off the top of my head as far as a prohibition on use. I think you're right, Lauren, in your assessment that if it's open for hunting activities, it's open for generalized recreational activities as well. I don't know if there would be perhaps benefit just in providing outreach to site users and advising them of the seasons. The middle lot and the west lot are very well signed. And in fact, I think there's even a sign on the east lot, and Brian, you can correct me if I'm wrong, that let folks know when the hours of hunting are allowed and when access is allowed, certainly during pheasant season. I believe that those time restrictions will come down afterward, and the generalized hunting hours will be just sort of what they are posted in the pamphlet. But I imagine we could probably produce some kind of signage to make sure that the public, the user public, is aware of what's going on. As far as restricting it, though, I don't think that that's a feasible option. And if any of my other officers know differently, please feel free to chime in.
Wendy, do you mind just introducing yourself and your position at DFW?
Oh, sure. Sorry about that. My name is Sergeant Wendy Willett, and I currently supervise our Snohomish County Enforcement Division on the land side of the house. So if you're in the area, you may see myself or my officers, Nick York or Stephanie Tank, on patrol.
Thank you, Wendy. Brian, did you have a response?
Yeah, and again, yeah, we rely heavily on our parking lot signage. Those signs gets changed every season we have, because there's different types of users that are out there. So users really need to pay attention to the signboards whenever they want to recreate there. We do not disallow certain activities just because of hunting season. These units are all open to the public for approved recreational activities. Crescent Lake, Cherry Valley, even Stillwater, Spencer Island, all of them are really busy with non-hunting activities even through the hunting season. So people need to be aware of it. Maybe bring along an orange vest along and read the signage that's posted when you get into the parking lots. And you find a corner that's not busy and go about your business just like every other user does. So thank you though.
Wendy, did you have a follow-up?
Yes, in regard to Lisa mentioning that Spencer Island is posted for hunting down one trail and no hunting down another, I just want to clarify that WDFW owns the northern section of Spencer Island, whereas Snohomish County owns the southern section. And the southern section has been designated sort of a conservation area that is consistent with bird watching, and hunting is specifically prohibited on that southern end. On the northern end is where hunting is allowed, where Fish and Wildlife property takes over. So that's why that area is different than this particular area at Ebey. And again, if I'm speaking inconsistently, Brian, please feel free to jump in.
No, I don't have any other comments. You answered it straight up. Again, you got to rely on the signage that's posted and the ownership of who allows what in their particular property. But it's a beautiful place to go year round, and great avenue for wildlife and bird watching as well.
Great. Thank you both. Kurt, I just want to acknowledge that I see your hand up, and I'm just adding you into the queue. There's a couple questions in front of you here. Another question. what would the impacts to vegetation and wildlife be if many people had to access this remote area? Studies may need to be done to open it up, but it sounds like that may not likely happen in the foreseeable future.
Yeah, I'll just mention, I do expect research to continue on that fen. You know, I don't think we're completely done at this point. And so I hope we can either bring the team from Colorado State back out here again, or continue working with the Department of Natural Resources to fully understand what we have and what either opening that up to public access or anything else we might do on our property, how that would impact it.
Great. Okay, thank you. All right, another question. Will you be considering an ADA waterfowl access program on the northeast leg of Ebey Island? There is very few in the North Sound region, and I believe it can be done with low impact, being there's already a gravel path on the Deadwater Slough.
Yeah, I think those are exactly the kinds of ideas we want to hear from people. I mean, that's a specific idea. That's great. I mean, that's exactly what we're looking for, is people to help us come up with those sorts of things. So thank you for that.
So hearing that would be considered. Kurt, go ahead and ask your question.
Just a comment about the discussion of birder-hunter conflicts. You know, this type of land and opportunities is becoming more and more limited in the country, and the users, we users need to figure out a way to get along and maximize our recreational opportunities, whatever they may be, while minimizing our impacts on other folks. And I think that can start by having something more than just the standard agency signage, and explaining exactly what the hunting activities are, when it occurs, and that sort of thing, and have the various users, you know, come up with some signage to help explain what their uses are on the areas. And what better way is there to engage dialogue between the users and actually having them work together and developing signage and understanding what each groups are doing. Just a thought.
Thank you, Kurt. Okay. Let me just check back in with my questions here. All right. I am not seeing any other questions. So I would love to ring out all your questions. And I think while you're thinking about that, Anna, I'd like you to, we've been sharing a link in the chat, and we're gonna keep sharing it because we are hearing a lot of great comments, and we really want you to use the link to add your comments in. And so we're just going to show you the web page. And if one of the staff members could just kind of orient folks to this web page and how they can access it and use it, please.
Lindsay, can you take a crack at that since you kind of put this together?
I can, yeah, I can try. Give us a little grace because we just made it, so it's brand new. So if you go on to our website, and I believe the website is wdfw.wa.gov, and then it's Ebey-island-plan. So that is the web address, the shortened web address, and we can put that in the chat if it's easier for folks. And it'll take you here to this page. And the comment form you can see is in this yellow bubble here right at the top. So you can see the comment form is underlined there. So if you just click that, it'll bring you to a separate page where you can put in whatever comment or question you'd like. It'll be delivered to us and we can respond to it. Other than that, it just gives a little bit of background information on Ebey Island. We will be posting the draft plan here when we have it ready. We also have a FEN report that we could also post here since it is an exciting new finding. And any sort of project updates that we have will be posted in that latest news box there.
Great. Okay. Well, thank you so much. And please do, there's an invitation to stay engaged. There's an invitation to add your comments. There's an invitation to reach out and ask questions. And just noting, anyone who spends their evening at a meeting means this area is important to you. You have questions, you utilize this area, it's important to you in some way. And I can tell you that there's a sincere intent to get you involved in this process and gain your input. So just really appreciate that. I am not seeing any other questions. I'm hoping, Anna, you can pull up that next steps slide, and hoping that Lauren can walk us through next steps to engage. So Anna will pull that up, and Lauren, you can get started at any point. I sprung that on Anna. That was me. All right. We'll just wait for this to work.
So have it kind of committed to memory at this point.
Yeah.
Okay, so towards the beginning of this next year, we'll meet with our Snoqualmie Wildlife Area Advisory Committee. And that, again, that's a group of about a dozen folks that use our wildlife area units to give us input on various topics. This Ebey plan is important to the overall wildlife area, so that'll be a big topic with that group as well. In the spring, in April, we'll have this draft plan come out. We'll post that on our website, and we'll be accepting comments on that plan once everybody has a chance to see what's actually in it. Again, my contact info, Lindsay's contact info is available on the website. We're always happy to talk with people about, ideas for this unit, especially, we had someone come up with an idea for an ADA waterfowl blind or area. I'd love to learn more about that, what specific area you're thinking, those sorts of things. Yeah, very interested in talking about over the next few months. And again, we'll be meeting with our Tulalip tribe co-managers as well on this plan. And so we just want to make ourselves available to you. Expect to see a draft out in the spring, and we'll be accepting comments on that as well. So that kind of, that's the summary, I think.
Wonderful. Okay. Well, I'm not seeing any other questions, so I'm going to let you all go. And again, there's an invitation to reach out if you have any questions, and definitely an invitation to stay involved in the process. So I will let you all go. Thank you for joining and your input, and have a great rest of your night. Thank you. Goodbye, everyone.